Hello and welcome formally. My name is Lishan Huang, Design Education Manager here at AIGA, the Professional Association for Design. This is One Designer, One Work, which is our new series that we just launched last week. That features one designer from our community and then one work that they've chosen that has really marked them and their lives and their creative practices. So this week, we have the honor of hearing from Lisa Babb, who is a lecturer at the School of Industrial Design at Georgia Institute of Technology, as well as an AIGA national board member. And the work that Lisa has chosen is Black Lives at the Paris Exposition 1900 by W.E.B. Du Bois. So I'll just turn it over to Lisa, who has a presentation. If you are tuning in, remember you can type your questions in the Q&A or connect with others in the chat. And a friendly reminder of our code of conduct. We want to maintain a positive and harassment-free environment. So let's keep it nice. All right, without further ado, turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Lishan. Always a good time to see you. It's nice to be here with you all. I'm so excited to share one of my inspirational favorite pieces with you all. It means a lot to me, design inspiration, and I can't do anything without it. So that's why we're here. So welcome. I just first want to start always with shout outs and gratitude because the person in front of you has a whole litany of community behind her. And so the first one is that this particular talk is for my aunt Barbara Clinton D'Souza, who more than any other created a thirst for literacy within me that still fuels so much of who I am today. There's also this unbelievable shout out and gratitude to Rick Griffith, who recently gave me a reason to pick my head up and look back into my own history. I also want to start with respect for the greats who love this work as much as I do and have researched it in a scholarly way to deliver this design omission to the world. So there's a shout out that is vital to the great Silas Monroe and the great Theaster Gates, especially. Their work brings this to the world in a way that is brilliant and inspiring. And so, fair warning, in case you didn't read this description, this will not be scholarly. This is about what this piece by the magnificent W.E.B. Du Bois means to me. I also want to give immense respect and gratitude to the family of Ahmaud Arbery on this horrific anniversary. He made the grave mistake of going out for a jog and feeding his sense of curiosity about what might be inside a house. And for this, the punishment he received was that he was trapped between two people deciding which would get to shoot him first. The worst part of all that is for 2 months, those killers got to sleep in their own beds. They got to eat breakfast and lunch and dinner. They got to watch TV every day. And they just lived their lives because it was clear to them that what they did was acceptable. And so I think of his mother, who has so much more dignity and restraint than I believe I ever could. She had to decide every day since then if she was able to eat breakfast or lunch or dinner, and if she would be able to bypass the thoughts that had to be instinctive because she knew where those killers lived for those 2 months. And so her grace is admirable and inspirational. And if you really want to know the true story of that on this horrific anniversary, please listen to Buried Truths. It is a phenomenal body of work. And so this is for all those folks. And so without further ado, let's get started. I completely understand if I've already turned you off and you are somehow not signed on to this level of candor from me. Anybody who knows me will tell you that I have no problem being vulnerable, and I am a person who believes in radical candor. And so I never mind sharing parts of myself in the quest for greater connection, a better Atlanta, and certainly a better world. So let's talk about design because I never spend enough time talking just about design. So I want to talk about design. Like a lot of people, I love information design. I know I'm not alone. Tons of people love information design. In fact, it's one of the really early on ramps to design for so many people. Its power of communication is absolutely unparalleled. And I just wanted to list some of the reasons why I love them. First is that you get this sense that it's been cooked down to its purest form and not even one more drop can be taken away. And it's not about what should be added, but not even one more drop can be taken away. It's been cut down to its barest sense to give you this message. But it doesn't mean that it's basic. That's the cool part. Every single thing in that space has been deemed essential and necessary for the clearest possible delivery. That is the epitome of Occam's razor. When a very simple explanation will do, go with simple. Make it simple, keep it simple, right? Next reason, it's personal because it's done by a designer with their absolute point of view, but it's built for delivery into the world. So it's for other people. And you can sometimes see that it's like this desperate attempt to be understood and to influence people that are viewing it to see things in a different way. The thing is, the receiver gets to do whatever they want with it. And that's a really cool thing. Next reason is on behalf of the people who love radical candor, I never, ever, ever like to argue with facts. Facts are facts, and information design begins with facts. There's an understanding that it's based on facts and data, and it's based on facts and data that are indisputable. That said, it can be a fact that a glass is 60% full. It can also be a similarly existing fact that the glass is 40% empty. Both are true, and the designer decides how they want to tell that story. So that's quite a power. Next is that there's this agency, right? In this way, it gives designers a chance to untangle from this client, theoretical client, and it empowers their choice, their agency, their self-expression. But the content is curated out of kindness in the sense that the entire purpose is to be understood. And so what is placed in front of you, what has been served up in essence is what it has been deemed necessary in order to be understood. And that in and of itself is, I believe, a kind act. And then finally, it is a really faster read than so many other forms of expression. When they're done very well, they can create these layers of meaning, like this particular favorite piece of mine has done for me. And so let's talk about Webb. His friends called him Webb. I don't deserve the right to call him Webb, but I kind of secretly wish I do, because those of you who know me know I can fan crush like a beast. W.E.B. Du Bois, he offers so much for me to connect to. Things like his sense of urgency around education as game changer. It speaks to me very, very clearly. His sense of urgency around literacy and its power for agency and how people can show up in the world. His sense of urgency around illuminating racial atrocities and this almost desperate attempt to try to make change around that. His sense of urgency around class-based prescriptions. Just because you were poor didn't mean you had to stay in a certain station and be prescribed to a certain thing. It was immediate for him, this sense, and made him at odds with tons of frenemies like Booker T. Washington, frenemy borrowed from Silas Monroe in this case. The power he found as a creative director. He's not been called a creative director, as far as I know, by anyone. And I don't understand why they don't. The fact that he was able to get this done and make sure that it happened in a kind of a way, that's creative direction. And he should be celebrated for that amongst all the other things we celebrate him for. The autonomy that he afforded himself, excuse me, as a print producer. When he decided to start Crisis Magazine, he knew he didn't want to have to ask for permission to do anything, including print it. So he bought a printing press in order to be able to make sure that Crisis would be able to print no matter who liked it or didn't. And then finally, how he pivoted his activism based on things not changing fast enough. He tried everything. You get the sense that, like, just like designers, he felt he could do something, or he must do anything that it took to make it all better. And he was desperate to do everything within his power and his means. I did say this would not be scholarly, but I need to offer a little bit of a brief timeline, just some of the high notes of his life, so you get the magnitude of this creative director, as I'm calling him today, and what he was able to do. 1895, he receives a PhD in sociology from Harvard. He was the first African American to do so. Imagine that lots of people talked to him about this and said things like, you must be honored to have received this doctorate. And his quote, direct quote, "The honor, I assure you, was Harvard's." I mean, the agency just when you big, you large. One of my aunts says, "When you big, you large." That was his response to being congratulated on earning the PhD. In 1899, there was a lynching in the state of Georgia by a man named Sam Hose. He was a young Black man, and it shocked him and created, it changed the trajectory of how he saw his life in many, many ways. Some of the data and the facts on this is when Hose was finally captured, newspapers in Georgia ran advertisements for his public execution, and souvenir hunters fought over parts of his body that were soon for sale in Atlanta stores. I need to repeat that in case that didn't land. As souvenir hunters fought over parts of his body that were soon for sale in Atlanta stores. When this happened, he was an assistant professor. Du Bois was an assistant professor at Atlanta University Center. So these are some of the events. Continuing on the timeline, December 28th, 1899, he leads a team of sociology students. I didn't say designers, I said sociology students, to create 63 pieces of magnificent information design for the 1900 Paris Exposition. They did them all in 2 months. Every time you have a deadline, I want you to think of the fact that these sociologists made these life-changing infographics in 2 months. In 1905, he starts the Niagara movement for civil rights, and it becomes the precursor to the NAACP. It aims to secure for all people the rights guaranteed by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. And those are an end to slavery, equal protection of the law, universal adult male suffrage. Its goal, its mission was to ensure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of minority group citizens of the United States and eliminate race prejudice, along with removing all barriers of racial discrimination through democratic processes. He is doing this thing. So in 1910, he resigns his faculty position at the Atlanta University Center because he doesn't find he can do as much good as he wants there. And he founds the Crisis Magazine. Within a year of its launch, the circulation grew to 120,000 and became his major vehicle for sociological scholarship and activism. He buys the printing press that I told you about, and he and his colleagues produce the magazine. The goal of this publication is to be a groundbreaking outlet for discussing critical issues confronting the African American community and sharing the intellectual and artistic work of people of color. It talked about vital issues like lynching and World War I. And again, he bought this printing press because talking about that stuff meant that that publication would be shut down if he depended on others to get it done. Now is when I'd like to give a shout out to the great AIGA medalist, Aaron Douglas, and the great Michelle Washington for all of her work unearthing so much of this to serve it up for so many others. Aaron Douglas, who designed so much of this, Michelle Washington, who's been really pivotal in giving Aaron Douglas his due. In 1920, he publishes a children's edition of The Crisis because he didn't want to leave kids behind. He believed they were the future, which is part of why he was in education for so long. It was called The Brownies Book, and it was the first periodical ever exclusively for Black youth in American history. That's just a little bit about W.E.B. Du Bois. So with regard to choosing the piece, the single piece, it is definitely hard because the book itself is the inspiration. The book itself is the victory. Nevertheless, there is a piece that I had to pick because I looked at it again and again and again from the time that I saw it. I want to give you a moment to take it in. Please forgive the bowing of the page. It's a bad scan. It's me not wanting to thoroughly crease my book because I love it too much. Notice that it starts in 1860 and goes to a presumed 1900, and it's talking about literacy rates. This is a piece that connected me to a bigger, better piece of myself. And I want to read you the text that accompanies it. For you scholars on the call who want something more scholarly, this black and white bar diagram takes on a very atypical woven structure used here for illiteracy figures and their corresponding years. This lattice-like arrangement is repeated in another bar chart about Negro property, plate number 23. This repeated style reflects both the necessity to be efficient and the continued exploration that comes with experimentation in an unfamiliar medium. The interleaved bars also visually relate to other curving and turning bar and spiral charts. Both are examples of a tension between Du Bois's interest in condensing data into the most economic form and his leadership of a team of sociologists acting as designers in training. Another atypical choice by the Atlanta University teams is the representation of extrapolated data, not yet measured by their study. Here they postulate an illiteracy rate of 50% in 1900 with a pair of question marks. I just need to remind you a little bit of context. Slavery has just ended, and during slavery, slaves were not allowed to be literate. So within this short period of time, that evolution is no small feat. It's beyond dramatic. This speaks to people who were formerly slaves and their descendants having a sense of urgency around literacy. And I think partly fueled by it being kept from them. It was one of the things that people decided would be the way to have a bright, strong future. It was everything because it was kept from them. Why does this move me? I'm kind of obsessed with literacy, in case you couldn't tell. And I connect my love of literacy to my amazing family. In fact, I can't even imagine anything about this life without that sense of urgency around literacy. I'd like to introduce you to two ladies. They're both my grandmothers. On the left is Olga, top left is Olga. She was born in Panama to a father who started the labor union on the Panama Canal. She had the kind of life where on Sunday evening, her father Graham, who is pictured beneath her, he would address the nation on the state of the union as it was evolving. And then immediately afterwards, my grandmother would play the piano for the entire country. And it was their Sunday evening entertainment. She would wear a very fancy dress and her gloves and play the piano for the country. On the right is my grandma Gladys. I apologize for not having a better picture of her. I have them both in my head saying, how could you show that picture? I'm sorry, ladies. I was in a crunch for time. Please forgive me. But that is Gladys on the right. She was born in Kershaw, South Carolina, to people who worked in the fields. Education was not necessarily a priority, as the economy of their lives did not allow for that. She would go on, and this is the best part of her story. She would go on to get her high school diploma in her late 70s. I still remember when she told me, I tried so hard to stifle my instinctive response because I was so stunned. First of all, that she was so just gangster. Like she was like, look what I just did, just how could she have done that then? And how did I not know? How could we have gone through our whole lives and I had no idea? I spent enough time with her that I should have known. It was shocking. Both of these ladies, oh, and by the way, I hope I told you that that was him addressing the radio, addressing the country on Sunday evening. That was his weekly speech. I think I told you that. Both of these ladies make their way to Brooklyn, where Olga's oldest son, Oliver, he was called Butch, meets and marries Gladys's daughter, Patsy, who, of course, are my parents. They go on to have 5 seriously scholarly kids. Not just scholarly, though. We're also kind of funny and we also make jokes all the time. And we're also, I think, kind of cool. I totally did not straighten the photo on purpose because we were kind of like this zany bunch that people were just constantly taking pictures of, and they never even took the time to straighten cameras and things like that. I am the one sitting on the lap, of course, always fixated on what is directly in front of me and what I could be doing with that. I want you to notice those clothes, that hair, not a hair out of place, all these things. This photo, it gives me pause because there was a lot of love between the 5 of us. There is still a lot of love between the 5 of us. Unfortunately, Patsy, my mom, our mom, dies tragically way too soon. And my father goes on to marry someone else who has 5 sons, which makes us 10 in total. And that's like a lot of story. But the in between those 2 events is what motivates me and a part of how we got to this business today. I want you to meet one more very, very, very important person in my life. This is my Aunt Barbara. She will be mortified that I use this photograph of her, but to me, it captures her when she's being herself. She was one of the people who taught me very well how to present myself, much in the way of Du Bois. It was all about how you presented yourself and, all of these things like that. Just really look buttoned up, keep it together kind of stuff. And she was really, really, really good at that. She was so good at that that she could masterfully navigate jobs and things like that that people didn't even notice she was underqualified for because she did them so well and she presented so well and she never failed to deliver. She was that kind of a consummate professional. But in addition to that, I love this photograph because it shows her when she's really comfortable being herself. And the reason why I'm showing you her now is because when mom died, my entire extended family rallied, and my Aunt Barbara commits an act of insane self sacrifice. She totally upends her life. She moves in to help my dad and my grandparents take care of us. And she, more than any other person, along with Sesame Street, light a fire for literacy and education in me that has never gone out. No matter what the content was, if ever we wanted a book, if ever I wanted a book, she would make sure that I got that book. And that started even before I could read well. So to say I owe her is doesn't even come close. I thought next I should show you the first thing that made me furious that I couldn't read. It was an Archie comic. My snarky sister and she and I completely are like one person at this point. We love each other so much, but we were terrible when we were kids. She was so excited that she could read and I couldn't. I was the youngest of the five. So she was taunting me with this Archie comic book, and she would do things like, "Oh, too bad you can't read." Wow, what a compelling story. I wanted to just be big enough to punch her in the face. It didn't happen. I just had to kind of skulk away, but I vowed that day that I would learn to read as quickly as I possibly could. And then, of course, the book beside it is a book that means a lot to my life because it is the first book that I remember Barbara ordering for me. And when she ordered it and it came, I just remember coveting this book so much. I still have an unbelievably unhealthy relationship to the Peanuts. I do think Charlie Brown is not emo. He's completely misunderstood. I think Snoopy's a baller and kind of a boss, and he's in charge of them all secretly. And Lucy's just a bully, but we'll talk about all of that stuff later. This book always gave me this option that if things got rough, me and Woodstock, we could just bounce and people would be really sorry they treated us badly. And that was a very healthy thing for the youngest of five and then turn into the youngest of 10 to know and think. So, enough, back to Du Bois and this piece. And I want to fast forward a little bit. Du Bois finds himself in Georgia when he's teaching at Atlanta University Center, and he dedicates a large percentage of this 1900 Paris exposition to illuminating the state of the African American life in Georgia because it is profoundly influencing him. And he's living here and he's taking it on, even though he's not from Georgia. All these things are happening. He creates this work in one of those, I call it, it's all good kind of a nod to counter the narrative that was so prevalent at the time, which was the suffering Negro. And I'm using the word intentionally. Everything that people had seen was the suffering Negro. Even it started out at a certain point as you got to feel bad for the Negro because without slavery, what is the Negro to do? It's just going to be suffering. This is going to be terrible from now on. And woe is them, also known as us. While I have one big reason, very big reason to be extremely proud of Georgia right now, and it is that little blue box next to it. I hope you know what I'm talking about. I'm very proud of Georgia for that. I do wonder what Du Bois would think about the state of Georgia today and what he would think about Ahmaud Arbery all these years later. And with respect to literacy, what he would think about the famous, infamous Atlanta cheating scandal, which still gives me chills as a parent. And then I look at that evolution from 1860 to 1900 and the gains. And then I think about Georgia today. So let's have a look. Adults lacking in basic prose literacy skill, sixth highest in the country. Percentage of adults with bachelor's degrees or higher, we're down 23. Public libraries, we are the 11th lowest per 100,000 people. Registered library users, second lowest. I want to know, I want to know how that lands for you in case you don't have enough. Have a look at this, Georgia. I don't know if you know this, but students who do not read at grade level by the third grade. It's why third grade reading is everything, eighth grade math is everything. Third grade reading, students who do not read at grade level by third grade are 4 times more likely to drop out of high school than proficient readers. 4 times more likely. Virtual learning, of course, necessitated by the pandemic, makes reading instruction way more difficult than in person. 4 times more likely to drop out of high school. And look at the difference between Asian, Black, Hispanic, and white. 2021. This slide. And so I share his sense of urgency. Obviously, I'm way passionate about this. I have been building my career around this sense of urgency. I have built my parenting around this sense of urgency. And that's why I made Word Girl. That's Word Girl over there. Shout out to Holly Corzo if she's on the call. She sewed that fabulous costume for me. Word Girl, if you don't know, is a PBS character. Just if I ever win Lotto, PBS is set forever, just so you know. I owe everything to PBS and my family. But they had a show called Word Girl, and it was one of the really impactful shows that made my daughter the great reader that she was. She was reading long before she went to kindergarten. In fact, they would let her do story time. And literally, when I asked her what Halloween costume she wanted, she said she had to be Word Girl, of course. And I was like, I don't even know if I could find a Word Girl Halloween costume. And my beloved friend Holly Corzo was like, me and Kristen can make that for you. And it is still to date the best costume ever. I still have it. I will never not have that costume. So it's why I made Word Girl. And finally, I'd like to end with 2 quotes by Du Bois, which mean a lot to me and connect to me deeply. I personally hope to be of use and make Georgia at least a little bit better. I want to end with this aspiration that if I do anything in my life worthwhile, it is that I made Georgia a little bit better by being here and working tirelessly towards literacy and third grade reading and high school graduation and college if you want it. And yeah, I'm saying trade if you want that, but something, some hope. And for people who knew Ahmaud Arbery to feel like maybe the future won't be as bad as now or the past. And so freedom without literacy is like being in a rowboat without paddles. Love that. Just straight ahead. And then the fact, the urgency, which I completely share. Now is the accepted time, not tomorrow, not some more convenient season. It is today that our best work can be done, and not some future day, and certainly not some future year. And so that is why I love W.E.B. Du Bois and these portraits of African American state in 1900, and especially his piece on literacy and the trajectory from 1860 to 1900, just life changing. And so thanks for listening. I really hope I didn't bore you.
Lisa, thank you so much for that presentation and that storytelling, weaving in your own journey, your own story with Du Bois, and bringing really these statistics and these facts to life through design and engaging everybody here in the chat. So I just wanted to invite our audience and remind folks, if you do have questions, we have about 10 minutes or so to talk, but I'll just kick things off with Lisa. And if you want to join in with audience questions, we'll weave them in as we can. So I guess I'm curious about the larger context of um, this work being shown in Paris in 1900. And I did a little bit of research before this presentation. And for those of you who are less familiar with this is essentially the World's Fair. And it was also a time where the European powers, but also Japan at the time, they were sort of showing off their colonial might. And so I think there's something sort of inherently political about this work, showing this at the US pavilion, but also showing African Americans in this way of progress and dignity that was, in fact, kind of counter to this kind of colonial grandstanding. So I guess, Lisa, I'll just kick it off with you. Like, what do you think about that historical context and moment outside of the US in that global moment?
So much. First of all, Mother England basically feeling like you guys are you're screwed without us, and then America being like, no, we're not. And then sort of super big fast forward, all kinds of American colonists pretty much saying you slaves are screwed without us, and African Americans pretty much being like, yeah, I don't think so. And Du Bois really doing a it's all good, we got this, and I use that expression intentionally because it's all good is usually preceded by some super terrible stuff, and it's kind of an affirmation that it won't kill you, just keep going, keep moving. And so he wanted to show our best stuff. Even some of the photographs in the book, people with their Sunday best clothing, not clothing you would wear on a day-to-day basis, all these kinds of things, saying we're doing great. We're doing unbelievably great. And by the way, we were left out of that last World's Fair, and we shouldn't have been left out of it. And Ida B. Wells becomes a reckoning force. She wrote a brilliant article on why she felt African Americans were left out of that World's Fair before that. And so Du Bois he's like, I'm gonna kick down the door. I'm gonna let you know. Guess what? You left us out last time, but we are so doing okay. It is all good. Keep watching.
Yeah. I think for me too, reflecting on that historical moment and this exposition is that it's almost kind of setting up the ground and the groundwork that opens up the opportunities for folks like Josephine Baker in Paris later on, or even James
Yes.
Baldwin after that
Yeah.
decades later, right? Kind of setting up and telling the story of African Americans to the French and to the Europeans more broadly that did create these pockets of acceptance and even celebration.
Certainly. And you also have radical candor happening in the blues. Look at those blues songs from back then. People were telling how hard it was to try to put their best foot forward. You had the Black church being one of the only places where so many people went to because it was their only salvation. They felt the most hopeful in that space, and they also felt like they could finally be 100% of themselves outside the gaze of white society. So you've got all these counter narratives happening at the same time, and there's this public persona versus this private reality, and the leveraging of trying to kind of make those two things happen, which resonates with, to me, 2021. I mean, I realized for my own life in sort of 2019, 2020, I spent a lot of time trying desperately to make people comfortable with me. I kind of don't care anymore. I'm like,
Mhm.
you don't gotta like me. I'm good. We good.
Yeah. Great segue actually to a question from Quentin via Facebook. Quentin is asking, how does Aunt Barbara's influence tie into what we now understand about quote unquote respectability politics? You spoke about being buttoned up and well presented, but is there any aspect of that that you might now reject on account of the proof that those ideas don't effectively save us? And these are quotes from Quentin's original question.
Hi, Quentin. Thanks for the question. I do love it. I read um a book with my daughter where I learned that I was raised by assimilationists. And that landed, that was kind of new knowledge for me. I would not have acquired that in any other place. And so she and I talked a long, long time about that. I know that in my life, I am able to say hard things. I had to say to my boss not too long ago, I really need you to recognize that this is how your privilege shows up. My aunt would have died. She would die. If she knew I did that, she would die. Um, she would just be like, "What are you thinking? You're going to lose your job. Don't lose your job." These kinds of things. So I teach my daughter different than I was taught. I love and respect her for teaching me that way in order to be able to get to where I got. I do think that's a part of how I got to where I am now. I don't think it's necessary for my daughter to get where she will go. She won't have to do that. And so I think it's a little bit of a trickle down, if that makes sense, Quentin. If it doesn't, please say so.
All right. Thank you for taking the question. And Quentin, thank you for that question
Mhm.
there. So we just wanted to encourage the audience, if you do have more questions, please type them in now. We're monitoring Facebook and LinkedIn and the Q&A pod here on Zoom as well. Let's see. I'm just reading the comments here to see all of the thanks that you're getting here, Lisa. And
Thank
Quentin's
you
also
all.
responding that this quote, what you said about raised by assimilationists, was a very powerful thing for you to share.
Thank you, Quentin. I believe in honesty. I'm a flawed human being, learning and growing and trying to be an ally for myself, and trying to decide, just like everybody else, which parts to keep, which parts to reject. Just trying to figure out how to show up in a way that doesn't keep me up at night, and that's evolving all the time. Um, and I hope it doesn't stop. I mean, because I think when it stops, that's when you start to get. I feel like you start to get a little cocky and a little arrogant. It's just like you don't try. I do want to always wrestle and struggle with how I show up in a way that doesn't betray the inner freedoms that I have afforded myself, uh, and release from that history, while not rejecting it outright. Because if I didn't have it, I certainly would not be in front of you. So it's a never ending. And as a parent, how much of that do I give to my daughter? How much of which pieces? And that's tough. That's the hardest part, actually, if you want to know the truth.
Well, thank you so much for that candor and that vulnerability, sharing both your own journey and now being a parent, and that story about work as well. I think we're seeing a lot of just thanks and people expressing their inspiration by you and your presentation today, Lisa. So really appreciate that. And do you have any final thoughts you want to share with people, or just where they can follow you and connect?
So I'm only on Instagram. I don't do Facebook because there are parts of my family that act crazy on it and I just don't need to know. I'm on Instagram at allnewlisa@gmail. And if I had parting words, I think that we should all wrestle with what we are doing personally to make our communities around us better, and what we are doing privately to make ourselves show up better for both the community itself and for ourselves. That balance. And I think those two jobs, that's my daily breakfast. And I want to do things that make Ahmaud Arbery's mom feel like she is not the only person trying to navigate all of this with grace, because I can't imagine her not going to their house. It triggers the Brooklyn in me. So
Yeah.
I look at people like that as role models.
Well, thank you for that, Lisa, and thank you everyone for tuning in. You can follow AIGA Design if you want to learn about the next one, get on our email list. But this has been a great format, designers going deep in their own lives, their own inspiration through this focus. So, Lisa, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for coming. Thanks to
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
I love seeing everybody's name in the chat, all these friends. You guys are awesome. I love my community.